Okay, it's time. Thank you very much everybody for coming and welcome to another meeting of Havering Interfaith Forum. And I'll introduce myself. My name is Tariq Mahmood and I'm Vice Chair of Havering Interfaith Forum. And today we're at the Salvation Army. Thank you very much for the facility.
Our pleasure.
To our host. There will be interfaith discussion on charity in our faith. Where we will be hearing about different perspectives from the faith speakers. Then we will all eat together. We will then conclude with an interactive question and answer session. It takes me pleasure to introduce all the speakers. First speaker will be Sidra Naim, second will be John Lester, then it will be Major Mike Stennett, and then it will be food and break time, then question and answer session. Right, first speaker, Sidra Naim, is the secretary of our Havering Interfaith Forum and a Muslim chaplain. She has given numerous lectures on the importance of giving charity and raised thousands of pounds for her own charities, including raising funds for feeding the needy and sending vulnerable people to the Islamic pilgrimage. So we'll welcome Sidra Naim and let's give her a
So I'm here to give this Islamic viewpoint on charity. And in Islam there are actually three types of charity. And within those three different types of charity, there are subsections as well. So I'm going to actually talk to you through all the three different types of charities that there are. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back in history to just before Islam came. Okay, so if we look at that chart, even though the previous messengers had come, in Arabia there was a lot of bad going on. And in relation to charity, the rich were definitely not looking after the poor. There was a big division between the rich and the poor. Okay? There was no concept of feeling how the poor feel. So the rich had been rich for so long that they had absolutely no concept of feeling how the poor feel. Because they didn't know what the poor feel like, then they didn't know how to help them. And there was an excess of food and wastefulness because people were not giving things away to charity. So when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came, he then was really, really worried and upset about the world that he was living in. And God then revealed the Quran, which we believe is the word of God. And it was in the Quran that the 5 obligatory things were revealed that all Muslims had to do. They are called the 5 pillars of Islam. And the 5 pillars are a little bit like 5 pillars, which are 5 things which one needs to do to keep the religion lovely and strong at the top, like the roof. Okay? And when Islam came, charity was an obligatory pillar, and it was right in the middle, keeping up the roof. Okay, so there's testimony of faith, prayer, charity is right in the middle, fasting we've already done, and we actually did pilgrimage last time. So we've actually covered all the pillars. Just this year we did prayer as well, earlier in the year. So charity is right in the middle, and once the pillar charity then came, everybody had to give money to the poor, and that then changed the world. So if we look at this timeline again, the rich not looking after the poor then changed to the rich have to look after the poor. Okay? And then no concept of feeling how the poor feel. The concept of feeling how the poor feel was reintroduced. Okay? And excess of food and wastefulness also then changed into appreciation and gratefulness. I can't believe you're here, all the way from South London. What a surprise. Okay, and so one of the pillars that was revealed was the obligatory charity, which is called zakah, which every Muslim has to give every year. So an important principle in Islam is that everything belongs to Allah, which is God. Wealth is therefore held by human beings in trust. What we mean by that is that it is actually God who gives us all the money that we have in the first place. So then it is up to us really then to give that money away. So each Muslim, did you know, has to pay 2.5% of one's capital and assets to those in need, and this is obligatory charity or zakah. So basically, everybody who's got approximately £1,000 or less, they then can have this charity, and everyone who has £1,000 or more spare in their bank accounts then has to calculate 2.5% and give to those in need. And what that does is it's a unique concept compared to other forms of giving in that it redistributes the wealth in society. When applied correctly, it effectively eliminates poverty. Okay? And what that happens is, you know, they say money is the root of all evil. So what that does is it redistributes the wealth, it makes everybody become humble. So if there's a millionaire, the more likelihood he is to get, or she is to get into bed. Think of all the pop stars, the more money they've got, the more they get into drugs and alcohol and all sorts, don't they, into problems. Money doesn't actually give you happiness, does it? So by having this system, it means that everybody who's rich becomes a little bit more poorer, and the poor become a little bit more richer. So it's a very good system. And because of this system, did you know that Muslims are the record breakers for giving the most amount of charity to the world? Much, which is not mentioned in the media. It never is it? It's always negative that's mentioned. Okay, so Islam prescribes a system of zakah, obligatory annual charity. According to Islamic law, it prescribes that every person who has a saving that exceeds, and it's a particular level, which is 85 grams of gold. Obviously it changes every year, the price of gold goes up. More than 85 grams of gold should give 2.5% of that saving every lunar year in charity. If every rich person in the world gave this charity, did you know that poverty would be completely eradicated from this world? Not a single human being would die of hunger. So it is actually a very, very good system. Okay? And did you know that it does not decrease your wealth? A lot of people think, oh, if you're giving thousands away every year, it decreases your wealth. It doesn't. We've actually been promised that in the Quran. And this is what it's likened to giving to charity. It says, the example of those who spend their wealth in the way of God is like a seed of grain which grows 7 spikes. In each spike is 100 grains. And Allah multiplies His reward for whom He wills. And Allah is all-encompassing and knowing. And that's actually in the Quran. So it tells you that that's how it multiplies your assets, by giving charity. It's likened to this system, which is really, really good. Okay, so that's the charity pillar, the obligatory pillar. Moving on then to fasting, which we covered last time. Fasting is a means by feeling how the poor feel. When we feel how the poor feel, we can then give them charity. And the most amount of charity we give in the year is actually in that month of fasting. So, did you know that these are all the people that are exempted from fasting? And the people who can never fast again, so the sick, we've got the aged, and some of these ladies who may get pregnant every year. They may get pregnant and then they've got to breastfeed, then they get pregnant again. They then can give money to the poor to help them to fast. Because to fast you need a breakfast and you need a dinner. Okay? So that is special charity which is given in Ramadan. by people who cannot fast to feel how the poor feel, so they then pay to the poor so that they can then eat. And that's called special money, that is fidya. Some of the Muslims will know that is called fidya. Okay? So, he who sleeps on a full stomach whilst his neighbour goes hungry is not one of us. That's a famous saying which Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said. And also, did you know that when it's Eid, our celebration which marks the end of Ramadan, some people can't have Eid. To do Eid, we need to break our fast and we need to eat. So we then have to give money to anybody who's poor in order that they can then open their fast and break their fasting month and then have their celebration called Eid. That's a special charity called Zakatul Fitr. Fasting must contain some shortage, and giving charity fills in that shortage. And that is why God ordained upon us Zakatul Fitr at the end of Ramadan, so that those who fasted may be purified of their idle deeds and shameful talk. And because there is a special bond between fasting and charity, and doing them both is a great blessing. Okay, so the Messenger of God obligated the Zakatul Fitr for the one who fasts as a means of purifying him from vain talk and immoral deeds, and as a means of feeding the poor. So that's all rolled into one. Forgives us our sins as well, any we may have committed in our fasting month, and feeds them as well. And it's normally given in the form of dates or barley, which is very traditional, and then that's used then to open their fast. But some people give money. In this country, most people give money. Okay? And then going on to the last pillar, which is pilgrimage, which we covered last time. That also has an Eid as well, a celebration after the pilgrimage month. And that story is actually linked with Abraham, who was asked to sacrifice his son, and God put a lamb there in his son's place to save him. That is the same story within Christianity and in Judaism as well. And what we do is we sacrifice that lamb, and then a third of that lamb is then given to the poor as charity to eat. Okay, so here is my slide with the lambs on it. And there is a little quote there just to explain that the meat is then given out to the poor. Okay, so these are sort of obligatory charities. Does anybody know the name of the charity that we give, which we can give any time of the year and as much as we like to the poor? Yes?
Sadaqah?
Sadaqah. So that is my next type of charity, which is what everybody else normally does, the other religions. They give at any time of the year, whenever they want to whoever they please. That is called sadaqah. And we give that in the name of God. So sometimes you will see the word lillah, which means for God. Okay? Lillah is any form of charity given purely with the intent to please God. This charitable giving is given on an entirely voluntary basis, and not like zakat, which is an obligatory charity due from every eligible Muslim on a yearly basis. Whatever wealth you spend in charity is to your own benefit, for you spend merely to please God. So whatever you spend in charity will be repaid to you in full, and you shall not be wronged. Okay? Does anybody know another reason why we give sadaqah, why we give it in the first place? Yes?
Purify our wealth.
To purify our wealth, and what else does it get rid of?
Sins.
Sins. So, sadaqah, if somebody's ill, they will give sadaqah. They may even sacrifice a lamb and give meat to the poor. Yes? And if anybody comes across bad luck, car parking tickets, speeding fines, somebody may decide, oh, you know what, I want to give a bit of sadaqah, Allah's not happy with me, to relieve us of those in case we've done something bad. So if you disclose your charities, it is good, did you know, but if you conceal them and give them to the poor, it is better for you. They say what your right hand gives, your left shouldn't know. Okay, so that's how we give charity. We don't really like to show off about things. We like to give it so that our left hand doesn't know. And it does tell you that But if you conceal them and give them to the poor, it is better for you, and God will remove from you some of your sins. And God is well acquainted with what you do.
We also give in thanks.
Yes, yes. So you can give thanks as well. When, for example, a baby is born, and did you know we've done that birth lecture where we shave the hair because it's unclean. It's come from a place that's unclean. We weigh it and we give that amount of silver to the poor. So that is a thanksgiving charity there, okay, which we do. So these are all very, very interesting. Now, out of all the sadaqah that we give, did you know that there are many, many sayings of the Prophet saying that we should give to the hungry. Free the captives, feed the hungry, and pay a visit to the sick. These are all forms of charity. And also, orphans and widows are mentioned specifically. So the Prophet said, I and the person who looks after an orphan and provides for him will be in paradise like this. And he put up 2 fingers, showing that this is how close we will be on the Day of Judgment. Okay? Right, who knows the third type of charity that we have in our religion, which is exclusive to Islam? Ongoing charity right until the Day of Judgment. Sadaqah Jariyah is a specific form of charity which is exclusive to Islam, which we are very, very lucky to have. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, when a man dies, his deeds come to an end, except for 3: a continuous charity, knowledge by which people derive benefit, and a pious son who prays for him. So these are ongoing charity right until the Day of Judgment. Things you do for yourself are gone, but things you do for others remain a legacy. Does anybody know what the top Sadaqah Jariyah charity is that we can do? I'm going to ask Fasila.
Water.
No. What do you do? What's your hobby?
Gardening.
Gardening. Right. So, trees. Okay? You can grow a tree, and did you know that anything that eats from it is regarded as charity right until the Day of Judgment? If you look at how many hundreds of years a tree grows for, it's a long, long time, isn't it? Okay? Anyone who shades under that tree or eats from that tree, it's a form of charity for you right until the Day of Judgment. Any animals who eat or form a habitat under that tree, all the benefit goes to you right until the Day of Judgment. And trees like olive trees or fruit trees, there's so much other things that come out, spices, rubber, cinnamon, but from the bark. All of those things, actually, they all form charity for you right until the Day of Judgment. And that includes plants as well, which is why I chose you. Anything that may, seeds and things like that, which coriander and things like that. Especially evergreen plants, which are there forever, grow again and again. Okay? What's the other type of Sadaqah Jariyah you can think of?
Providing a will.
Okay, we can do that one in a minute.
Hospital equipment.
Okay, yes, hospital. You're saying that because you work in one. What about a mosque? Okay, participating in the building of a mosque. Whoever builds a mosque in which the name of God is mentioned, God will build a house for him in paradise. That's absolutely amazing. And then in that mosque, if you give a copy of the Quran to someone, whoever reads or benefits from it, you earn all the blessings. Okay? Any prayers? Okay, any prayers that you teach somebody and then they use it in their prayers, that is blessings for you right to the Day of Judgment. Any help in educating a child, especially an orphan child, so many packages out there nowadays. But even in everyday life, if you give knowledge to somebody and they carry on that knowledge, even if it's good manners, did you know you get the blessings right until the Day of Judgment? Okay, and also water cooler. So you mentioned fountains, wells. in Islamic countries there's no water, so there's great blessings if you open up water wells and things for people that they can drink from, and that then can benefit you. You mentioned hospitals, especially a wheelchair. If a wheelchair is donated to a sick person, every time that person uses that wheelchair, you will get the benefits right until the day of judgment. Okay? One thing that we are not allowed in Islam in relation to money is, does anybody know?
Interest.
Interest, good. We are not allowed interest. The reason is that at the time when Islam came, but also before Islam even came, it was happening, people were using the poor. They were lending people to the poor and then saying, give me back the money in a year's time, but you have to give me this much back. They were using the poor for their money. And that is why interest is completely forbidden in Islam. And there is actually a big sin, a big penalty for doing interest. And did you know that if by accident you end up giving interest through bank accounts and things, it's quite impossible sometimes in this country, then we have to use that money towards making toilets or roads or pavements. But we don't get any benefit from that, although the community will get benefit from that. Okay? That's just where it's from. The other thing we're not allowed to do is to bribe. So you get all this bribing that goes on in politics or abroad, where people give money and they start saying, I want a degree in medicine and I'll give you £5,000. That's not allowed in Islam because that's cheating, isn't it? So there is actually a penalty to pay for that as well. We're not allowed to do bribes. Okay? Other forms of charity, there are so many. I could go on the whole day. I'm going to go through a few. Did you know smiling is a form of charity? And that actually is within other faiths as well. So even smiling is a form of charity. And did you know speaking good is also saying something good is charity? Speak good or remain silent is what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, told us to do. Did you know removing harmful things from the path is an act of charity? So, there was a new initiative the King did, going out and cleaning streets. We're actually supposed to do that in our religion. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said every Muslim has to give in charity. The people then asked, but what if someone has nothing to give? What should he do? The Prophet replied he should work with his hands and benefit himself and also give in charity from what he earns. The people further asked if he cannot find even that. He replied he should help the needy who appeal for help. Then the people asked, and if he cannot do even that? The Prophet said finally then he should perform good deeds and keep away from evil deeds, and that will be regarded as charitable deeds. So basically, you're not let off the hook, no matter how poor you are. Okay? This is a summary of all the things that we can do to get reward and is regarded as charity. Being patient, visiting the sick, being forgiving, clean and tidy, smiling, respecting your elders, being truthful and honest, loving your neighbours, being nice to your parents, feeding the poor and hungry, speaking good or keeping quiet, not wasting food or water, being fair and just in all dealings, loving your brothers and sisters, what you love for yourself. Remember, God constantly cares for orphans. Remember God constantly caring for orphans and widows. Be good to your wife or husband. Be gentle and loving to your children. Be kind and gentle with plants and animals. Don't be angry, it says. And it says to respect your mother 3 times and then your father. Okay? I've got a video on just to summarise now.
Anyway, there was a guy, big guy, came over to us and said, I always look at their sheep, and I've done this all my he reminded you that I always look at their shoes. Look at their shoes condition. And he said he had your shoe test. We checked and we did his embarrassment, but we had to respond in a way. And that was a little bit like what we were saying at the there was an expectation on us to do so we did what was expected, even though we knew at the time we'd been set up.
Okay, so that brings me to the end, and I think John Lester, you are next. Okay, thank you.
Your last point, number 17. Feed your wife.
Yes.
Feed your spouse. I quite like that.
Yes, because in Islam we're the providers, the men are the providers. So John is our Baha'i representative, and he's also the chair of the Interfaith Forum.
I thought I'd begin by reading you an extract. An American called Myron H. Phelps went to Haifa and observed Abdul Baha, the son of Baha. This is what he wrote. Imagine that we're in the ancient house of the still more ancient city of Akka, which was for a month my home. The room in which we are faces the opposite wall of a narrow paved street, which an active man might clear at a single bound. Above is the bright sun of Palestine. To the right, a glimpse of the old seawall and the blue Mediterranean. As we sit, we hear a singular sound rising from the pavement, 30 feet below, faint at first and increasing. It is like the murmur of human voices. We open the window and look down. We see a crowd of human beings with patched and tattered garments. Let us descend to the street and see who these are. It is a noteworthy gathering. Many of these men are blind. Many more are pale, emaciated or aged. Most of the women are closely veiled, but enough are uncovered to cause us well to believe that if the veils were lifted, more pain and misery would be seen. Some of them carry babies with pinched and sallow faces. There are perhaps 100 in this gathering, besides many children. They are of all the races one meets in the streets: Syrians, Arabs, Ethiopians, and many more. These people are ranged against the walls, or seated on the ground, apparently in an attitude of expectation. For what do they wait? Let us wait with them. You've not to wait long. A door opens and a man comes out. He is of middle stature, strongly built. He wears flowing, light-coloured robes. On his head is a light buff fez with a white cloth bound about. He is perhaps 60 years of age. His long grey hair rests on his shoulders. His forehead is broad, full and high, his nose slightly aquiline, his moustaches and beard, the latter full though not heavy, nearly white. His eyes are grey and blue, large and both soft and penetrating. His bearing is simple, but there is grace, dignity, and even majesty about his movements. He passes through the crowd, and as he goes, utters words of salutation. We do not understand them, but we see the benignity and the kindness of his countenance. He stations himself at a narrow angle of the street, motions to the people to come towards him. They crowd up a little to insistently. He pushes them gently back and lets them pass him one by one. As they come, they hold their hands extended. In each open palm he places some small coins. He knows them all. He caresses them with his hands on the face, on the shoulders, on the head. Some he stops and questions. An aged Negro who hobbles up he greets with some kindly inquiry. The old man's broad face breaks into a sunny smile, his white teeth glistening against his ebony skin as he replies. He stops a woman with a babe and fondly strokes the child. As they pass, some kiss his hand. To all he says, "Marhaba, marhaba, well done, well done." This scene you may see almost any day of the year in the streets of Akka. There are other scenes like it, which come only at the beginning of the winter season, In the cold weather which is approaching, the poor will suffer, for as in all cities they are thinly clad. Some day at this season, if you are advised of the place and time, you may see the poor of Acca gathered at one of the shops, where clothes are sold, receiving cloaks from the master. On many, especially the most infirm or crippled, he himself places the garment, adjusts it with his own hands, and strokes it approvingly as is to say, now you will do well. There are 500 or 600 poor in Acca, to all of whom he gives a warm garment every year. So that's how Abdu'l-Baha spent his time, much of his time in Acca. He was constantly giving to the poor, and it's not surprising when he died, there was a huge procession to his funeral of the poor, deeply mourning the fact that their benefactor had gone. So that's Abdu'l-Baha, giving us a lovely example of consistent charity. The Baha'i faith has houses of worship which are called Mashrikul Askars. It's an Arabic term for dawning place of the mention of God. And these are not just temples, not just houses of worship. They have 9 sides, and they're open to anyone from any religion to go in and read from their holy book. But no one can give a sermon. You only read from the scriptures. The Mashrikul Askar has various dependencies around it. All when they're fully built and fully developed, there's a hospital, pharmacy, travellers' hospice, a school for orphans, care homes, all kinds of things that are needed by the community. There is the one in America has a long-standing care home in its environs. Very few of the people in it are actually Baha'is, because of course these are for everybody. My faith is for everybody. So that is the Mashrikul Askar, and of course so you have charitable things all around the house of worship. The idea is in the future that Baha'is will gather at dawn in the Mashrikul Askar for prayer, and of course you have all these physical helps around. When the United Nations started after the war, the Baha'i faith was immediately supportive, and is now an NGO, a non-government organisation with consultative status with UNICEF and also the United Nations Economic and Social. And it's also involved with many of the other things that the United Nations does for the world. There is a Baha'i international community which also does its best to help around the world. And there's an international disaster fund which we can send to Haifa, to the Universal House of Justice, and if there's a disaster in the world, then that fund can be used. In the local level, the Baha'is do not have a clergy, so we elect from amongst their number 9 people to be members of the spiritual assembly. No nominations, no candidates. All the adult Baha'is can vote and be voted for. The local assembly's job is to provide guidance, advice and assistance for those in difficulties. If someone cannot afford to educate their children, the assembly is adjourned to help it. It's supposed to help the poor and destitute in their midst. The local assembly Havering, for example, has a special fund for the homeless that people contribute to, and we send food to food banks. In the future, these spiritual assemblies will be local houses of justice. So to the individual. Well, by donating to the Baha'i Faith Fund, you are actually giving to charity, because the Baha'i Faith is a registered charity, and of course all the good that the assemblies can do, and up to the Universal House of Justice, your money is helping towards it. We have something called Hukuk Allah, the right of God. And that means that if you, it's similar to what Sidra said about the gold standard, if you have a certain amount of gold, if you have made a certain amount of gold that year, once all your essential, once you paid the rent or the mortgage and got your food, all the essentials, once you paid all the essentials, 90% of what's left goes to Hukuk-Allah, it goes the right of God, it goes off to the Universal House of Justice, and because that's where the disaster fund and the other charities they support come in. One thing we have to think of though is why is charity necessary? One reason why charity is necessary, the main reason, is we have a defective world order. Allah said the old world order is being rolled up and a new one laid down in its stead. So we believe that the Allah has given us the blueprint for the future world order that will be based on unity and justice and equity and so on, whereas the current one is very faulty. Baha'is are building the new world order. Much of what they do much of what they contribute has to go towards that. So the guardian of the Baha'i faith, Shoghi Effendi, advises us, in the first place, every believer is free to follow the dictates of his own conscience as regards the manner in which to spend his own money. Secondly, we must always bear in mind that there are so few Baha'is in the world relative to the world's population, and so many people in need, that even if all of us gave all we had, it would not alleviate more than an infinitesimal amount of suffering. This does not mean we must not help the needy, we should, and our contributions to the faith are the surest way of lifting once and for all time the burden of hunger and misery for mankind. It is only through the system of Baha'u'llah, divine in origin, that the world can be got on its feet, and want, fear, hunger and war, etc. be eliminated. Non-Baha'is cannot contribute to our wealth or do it for us, so our first obligation is to support our own work, because only Baha'is can give to the Baha'i faith. And also there's one of the advices for the assemblies. Assemblies, moreover, should perform their charitable works with a pure motive and not with the thought of propagandizing for the faith. So if an assembly does some charitable work, does not run around saying this is built to you on behalf of the Baha'i faith. But last point about the New World Order, it's a bit like if your sink has overflowed and the kitchen floor is seeming bubbling with water. The charities we have at the moment are as if they're in a mopping up operation, mopping up the water. What the Baha'i New World Order is to aim to do is to turn off the tap.
Thank you very much for that. I particularly enjoyed your point where you were talking about the New World Order. And I can't remember a list of things, but one of them was about unity.
Yes.
And I think much of what you have said and much of what Cedra said, I think we can, it doesn't matter what faith you come from, I think we can accept all of that. We can accept that faith as charitable giving is about a reflection of our faith. It's about a reflection of our relationship that we have with our Maker, however you interpret and whoever your Maker is. Probably at the end of the day it's all the same, but we're not going to argue about that at this moment in time. But it's about a reflection of the heart and about the sincerity of the love that you have for your faith and for the leader of your faith. I don't mean the top imam or the general of the Salvation Army. I'm talking about your Maker again. If you love God, what is the point of loving God if you have no love for your neighbour? So it's an essential part of our understanding that to evidence your love for God isn't just about having nice, pretty thoughts and saying prayers. That's part of it. But it is also expected to be evidenced in the way in which you live your life and the way that you treat others. And not just those that are nice to you and those that believe the same thing as you. Your neighbour can be anybody. And of course, we all understand that concept. So the evidence of our love for God is evidenced in the way that we behave and that we treat others. Now here, on our first slide, we've got this is the foundation of what we do in the Salvation Army. It says that our international mission, the Salvation Army, an international movement, is an evangelical part of the universal Christian church. Our message is based on the Bible. Our ministry is motivated by the love of God, which we've just spoken about. Our mission is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. That can either be through words or it can be through actions, and to meet the human needs in his name without discrimination. That's our foundation. And I think you would probably say the same thing. You would probably say the same thing. You would probably use slightly different words. You probably wouldn't have Christ in that. But it would be the same value, the same points, the same understanding of how your faith sits within your structure and how your faith sits within the world itself. Now, the Salvation Army, we are known as the world's largest social organisation in the world. And people often, if you speak to the public, they are surprised to discover that we are a church. They think of us as a charity. Well, of course, like you said, your Barbie church is registered as a charity. We have charitable status. The Salvation Army is a charity. It's a registered charity. Like the Red Cross is a registered charity. I would be surprised not that the part of the Muslim Foundation will have registration as charities. But we are also a church. In fact, there was a funny incident on Sunday. We'd just finished our worship downstairs, and we were having coffee after our time of worship, and a new lady who I'd never seen before had come in to join worship with us, and at the end of the worship she came up to me and she said, are you a Baptist or are you a Methodist? I said, I'm a Salvationist. And she said, well, what's that? I said, well, if you go to the Methodist church, you are a Methodist. If you go to the Baptist church, you are a Baptist. If you go to the Salvation Army church, you are a Salvationist. And she said, oh, that's nice. I didn't know you were a church. When do you have your services? I said, well, you just sat through the service. So I'm not quite sure what she thought she was sitting through. But yes, we are a church, but we are also well known as a charity as well. And while you were chatting, Cedra, I was just doing a quick internet search, and it was talking about people of faith. Doesn't matter what faith, but people of faith, religious people, give more than people without faith. And I thought, well, okay, then how do you prove that? And they then went on to say that 33% of the population of the world are considered to be religious. That means that they take their faith seriously, not just because it's on their birth certificate. So 33% of the population are religious and give 52% of charitable giving throughout the world. So it's a smaller percentage, but it gives the larger percentage of charitable donations. So the title of this particular article was Less God, Less Giving. And I quite like that. Less God, less giving. So if you've got little God in your life, you're not giving very much. If you've got no God in your life, you're probably not giving very much at all. But if you have God in your life, then you should be giving. Whether that's 10% as a tithe within your church, or whether that is 2.5%, was it, of what is remaining, or I can't remember the figures, but we've all got our percentages because it's an important way of giving our members and people of our faith a direction on how to cope with today's pressures in the West on how to give charity, and how when we're not so when we're not so well off financially. I love the idea, the 17 ways of giving, and I love the fact that there are more ways to give. Now I know when I meet with other ministers in the town, and I was chatting with some ministers in the town one day, and they said, oh, the Salvation Army, we're so jealous of you. And I said, well, why? They said, you have so many men in your congregation. And I said, well, that's probably because we have bands. You know, we've got the Salvation Army brass band, and the men like to play in the band. So it tends to give, certainly in a Christian context, we tend to have a slightly higher percentage of men in our congregations than perhaps some other churches do. And I said, well, we take that as for granted. And they said, and all those people that you have that do all the voluntary work. And I said, yes. And I think it was an Anglican vicar said to me, he said, I have so many people coming to my church, but I can't get them to do anything. They're quite happy to pull out their checkbooks and write a check rather than to actually come and do something. And in the Salvation Army, it's the other way around. Is that it's very difficult to get money out of our people. I mean, we do get money out of our people, obviously, but we get very much their help and their support on all the charitable actions that we're doing as volunteers. But because of, I suppose, our reputation over the years, a lot of people, a lot of the general public like to come and help us with a lot of the activities that we do. And so we have a saying, we can't do any of the work that we are well known for, whether it's working with people in impoverished environments or whether it's working with the homeless. We can't do any of that unless we have volunteers and unless we have the general public contributing towards the resources that we need, whether that's a building or whether that is financial giving or whether that is some other type of support. So, but most charitable organisations are in the same position, that they need support from the general public as well as from their own people. And it's important that we as churches, that we do give opportunities to people who are not part of our church and perhaps not part of any faith, that we give them opportunities to be able to express some kind of goodness in the world. Because that's one of the opening doors to help people come into faith in the first place. If your heart is open towards another person, there's a better chance that your heart will be open towards God as well. But I take the point that you made in your talk about that you don't do your good works as a public relations. And perhaps some people might point the finger at the Salvation Army because we're experts at public relations, because we're trying to get people to support the work that we do. Not for our own glory, but because the need is there. And so you have to show off your work so that you can get more funding, so that you can do more work. But that's another issue. Now, I've worked for the Salvation Army all of my adult life, since I was 23, I think. And I've worked all over Europe, in some of the most impoverished parts of the European setup, particularly in places like Czechoslovakia, Romania, Moldova, Georgia, Russia, Slovakia, and also in parts of the UK in some of the most deprived housing estates. And I've also worked for the Salvation Army in India and in the Andaman Islands during refugee crises. So I know what it is about to do charitable works on a professional level, but I also know what it's about to do charitable works as a volunteer, because we have worked with volunteers through all of those different environments. Now, I don't want to talk so much about what we do internationally. You can find that on the internet. But what you probably don't know is, what do we do locally? And I think that's what our next slide is going to help us with. Okay, so this is what we do at a local level here in Romford, and that will be multiplied out throughout the whole of the country, because what we do is not remarkable, it's what most Salvation Armies do around the country. Some will do a little more, some will do a little less, but it's generally the same sort of thing. So on a Monday we have a food pantry and a baby bank. So people can, on limited income, can come along and they can receive more food than what they pay for. So if they pay £5, they go home with about £20–25 worth of goods. It's better than a food bank. Food banks are wonderful. It's a shame that our society has made food banks a structured part of life. It shouldn't be, but it is. And but you can only go to a food bank a certain number of times, and it's not healthy for people to always receive something for nothing. That's not a healthy way of living. It's a horrible way to feel if you're a family, that you're always waiting for somebody to give you something for nothing. So what the pantry does, if you don't know about pantries, pantries allow people to make a contribution. So they can buy fresh food at prices that are lower than what you buy in the shop. So we buy it in bulk, and they're able to pay the cost price without the added extra that the supermarkets or the local shops will put on. So they will buy a little bit, so they might spend £5 on milk and bread, for example, or milk and meat or something like that. But then they will take away with them the free food that we're able to collect from around the town. So that means they go home with about £20, £25 worth, and maybe 30 per pound, depending on what we get from the supermarkets. Okay, moving on. So the baby bank is similar. Baby bank is nappies and talcum powder and things that mums need for their babies. So if you can't afford much for your food, you can't certainly afford much for your nappies and things like that. We also include in that, and excuse me for saying so, but I think it's an important thing, is lady sanitary things. Because if you can't afford food, then sanitary aspects also get handled, particularly if you're on low income. And then we have children's clothing, and moving on. And then we have what we do for the homeless. Now, we have people coming in every day into the centre. We can't provide accommodation for them because the way that the social system is here in the UK, you have to go through something called street link, which means everybody is linked up with housing from the housing authorities. So we can't provide we do have hostels around. We have the nearest one is in Ilford, but we cannot place somebody in there. They have to go through the official system of the town and of the borough. So we can't place them in a bed. But there are not enough beds for the number of people that are homeless. So we provide food for people. They can come here, they can take a food package, they can have a shower, they can get emergency, emergency sleeping bags, specially designed for the winter, that are waterproof. And they can get some new clothing from us as well. The Salvation Army, the emergency support, you remember the Wennington fire? Last summer we had the drought and the fire. We were asked, because we were seen as neutral, we weren't part of the municipal authorities, we were a neutral organisation, and we were asked to set up an appeal fund. So we did what do you call it? Oh, on the internet, where you do crowdfunding. That's it, crowdfunding. That's it. I've answered my own question. A crowdfunding page, and we raised over 30,000 to help the families that didn't have insurance, to help with the essential needs to get them through the winter period. And moving on, the Salvation Army at Romford, when the Queen's funeral took place, you remember last year, there were huge crowds that were for about 10-15 miles of queues. So the Salvation Army had stations along the route where people could get a hot drink and some refreshments. And my wife and I and some of my members, we had a van like this one that's down here. It's a van, so we took our turn, so we would make flasks of coffee, then walk down to the river and then give everybody a hot cup of coffee. Problem was, we could only give them a half cup of coffee, because if we gave them a full cup of coffee, 20 minutes later in the cold, what do you want to do? What God designed us to do. And there weren't many places for people to be able to do that, particularly at 3 o'clock in the morning. So half cups of coffee was just enough to take the chill off, and then they could walk on until they came across another station. And then, of course, just down the road we have the Salvation Army charity shop. Again, all those contributions that come into there, whether it's furniture, clothing or household items, it's more than just being a charity shop. People go in there, they go in to chat, they go in to volunteer, they go in to contribute, they go in there to get hold of something that they might need, whether that's a bed or a wardrobe or a dining table or a television or pots and pans, whatever you need for a household. And it helps just make your money go a little bit further. So those are the type of charitable actions we do throughout the country. And then, of course, we have every Thursday, we have over 100 elderly people come in, and they take part in the programme. They sit in. It's so important, particularly after COVID, for people to be able to get out and mix and be amongst each other. We all know that for ourselves, but particularly for elderly people who may have lost a spouse. So they come and they can have their lunch at the cafe, and then there's an afternoon's entertainment program for them. That's on the surface, but underneath that you visit people who are going into hospital, you can counsel the people who have maybe lost a partner, are bereaved, and people who have got other health issues or other issues. We're able to either, we can't do it for them, we can at least show them the way and signpost them to get help somewhere else. And that's exactly what we do with the homeless people. If we can't help them, we signpost them to the people who can help them. And then, of course, you've got the Christmas toy appeal. I think you did a toy appeal last year, didn't you?
Yes, that was for the summer.
That was a summer appeal,
scheme.
that's right. We do a Christmas one, and the shops in the city, the shops in the town make contributions to us. We get names off the municipal authority social services, so we make up about 400 or 500 parcels. And of course, we have our own names that we add to that list for people that we're dealing with as well. I think that's the last one.
End, yeah.
That's the end. So that's generally what an average Salvation Army congregation will be involved in, but it's also, like I say, very much related to what the local public has supported us with as well. And it's all about expressing our faith and living. I think you touched on it, and you touched on it as well. It's about living your faith and living a holy life. Whether that's a smile. I never pass a beggar on the street without making eye contact. I don't pretend not to see the cup. I don't always give something because sometimes it's not healthy to, because I'm not quite sure what they're going to do with it. Sometimes I'll, I know they can come here and receive something as well. But even if I'm walking through London, I always make eye contact and just give them a nod and I think it was you was the smile, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and give them a smile. Because they're another human being. I can't help everybody, but I can at least recognise you. And I think that's an important thing. So, God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to have 20 minutes to eat now and network with everybody else. I'm dying to speak to you. And then afterwards we'll come back here for questions and answers. So in the meantime, if you can think of questions to ask, keep them in your mind what you want to ask. Okay? So yeah, if you can just make your way at the back and then you can eat.
Well, in that sense you are.
And network with us. I can't believe you're here. You're so sweet.
Is that whether you call it karma or whether you call it something else? It's about doing two things.
This one's doing the weekends best. I was Sunday one time. I was in London with my son tomorrow. Very nice.
No, if you really recognise it, even on the deepest level of all of our faith, we recognise that that's humanity.
I thought you were looking on the internet.
We're all one. And so if you hurt either, you rejoice. Yeah, those are the attitudes. Anyway, there was a guy, I think, came over to us and said, I always look at their shoe, and I've done this all my life. So he reminded me, I said, I always look at their shoe. Their shoes are in good condition. And he said, he had good shoes. We knew he was embarrassing, but we had to respond in a way. And that was a little bit like what you were saying. There was an expectation on us. So we did what was expected, even though we knew at the time we've been set up.
Keep an eye on that.
It's the dinner bell.
Okay, we're ready now for the question and answer session. So, if you can pop your hand up if you've got a question, one question at a time. And also, first of all, the questions need to be relevant to the topic, otherwise we could be here all night. And also, which religion that question is for. Okay? So let's start off with Naman.
The question is aimed at all the speakers. Okay, charity is a good religious cause, compulsory, as required by some faiths or by every faith. Okay, so the causes for the society which they benefit from anyway. Okay, but the other thing is politicians, the government, and companies, right? When they make donations, are they preserving their own self-interest that way? Or?
Okay, in terms of Islam, it depends. So first of all, in Islamic countries, there's no tax, okay? And this is why a lot of people go abroad to work in Middle Eastern countries. And why there's no tax is, it's the government that collects the zakat, which is the obligatory pillar that I spoke about. And they then distribute that to the needy people, okay? If you're Muslim and in this country, the government's not Islamic, so we have to choose where we want the money to go. So either way, really, we don't really know if the money is going in the right place, even with organisations here, but we have to trust. And also we know we're giving it in God's name, so it's between us and God, isn't it? So even abroad, you know, the politicians and things, they may take money, we don't know, but we've given it with a clean heart, and that is registered with God. And then what other people do with it is up to them, isn't it? A little bit like our taxes here. We don't know where our taxes are going and where they're being used. But we give them with a clean heart, and then it's up to everybody else, isn't it? Okay?
I think with the whole, I mentioned Hukuk means that if you give to charity, if you want to help someone in the other part of the world, you don't give it to an organisation who you don't know. It goes to the Baha'is in that part of the world, so you know it's going to the source. There's one thing about Hukuk, I said 90% of what's left after you've paid all your bills and everything. There's one very vital requirement about Hukuk. You must want to pay it. You must be overjoyed to give your money to God. If you aren't, He doesn't want it. Keep it. Don't pay it.
It'd be nice if the government was like that, wouldn't
It
it?
wouldn't.
Am I overjoyed? Well, Western values, as opposed to other sorts of values, is that yes, the democracy requires that we all pay our fair share according to our income, and that seems reasonable. If we as people of faith want to pay more, you know, whether that's the tithe in your church or whether that's charitable giving of your time and your efforts, or just making a contribution in the street, or with a bank debit, I think as a charity we have to be as open to the public as possible, so that they can see quite clearly the money that is given is spent for the reason it was given. I can remember back in, I think it was the 1980s, there was a huge issue where charities were spending more and more on administration costs than they were actually, you know, in some cases they were spending 80% on their salaries, on their properties, on their cars, and only 20%, 20p from every pound was going to the cause. And some of the biggest charities in the country were guilty of that. And then the Charity Commission has stepped in, and everybody had to be a lot more accountable. And so I don't know what the law is here in the UK, but certainly in some parts of Europe you are allowed to charge up to something like 7% of your income to go towards your administration costs, and the rest you have to give for what it's given for. Now obviously everybody recognises there is a cost in doing something. So if we have a homeless person coming downstairs, we've got somebody who's employed to look after that homeless person. So where does that money come from? Sometimes it can come from the municipal authorities, but we're talking about Havery, so it doesn't come from the municipal authorities. So it has to come in from other, as a percentage of our administration costs. So that, I think people understand that. But what they don't like to see is they don't like to see people from charities driving around in Rolls Royces and BMWs. I was chatting with Linda. No, was it? Oh, there is a Linda here. Anyway, I was chatting with somebody earlier. I was in Belgium, and part of my job in Belgium was to represent the Salvation Army at the European level, and I was working with a charity called European Anti-Poverty Network. And the salaries of some of these people, because I was sitting on their management board, were huge. They were huge salaries, and I said, but you're supposed to be an anti-poverty network, yet you're making a huge amount of money on this. I can't be part of this. I'm stepping back because I don't agree with it. So I don't know if that answers your question. Sort of.
Okay, anybody else who's got a question? Linda?
Sidra, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about there's a £1,000 threshold. How long has it been £1,000? Does it go up or down according to inflation?
It varies every year. So I mentioned about 75 grams of gold, and the price of gold varies every single year. So we have to look up on the internet what the price of gold is and calculate it. And it does tend to go up every year.
Okay,
Yes. Yes. That was approximate. The same with the silver. You know, I was talking about, you know, when you thank God and you give charity. And we were talking about when the baby's born and we weigh the hair, and then we give the same amount of silver price to the poor. Again, the price of silver changes as well every year as well. But thank God for the internet to look up these things. In the olden days, we used to go to the jewellers and find out that way what the price of the gold was.
Would it depend on which jeweller you went to, depending on what price you got?
Well, universally nowadays there is one
It was a
rate.
joke. It was a joke.
Yes. Don't make things difficult for me. Okay, who's next? Aisha.
A lot of what we give online have that little gift aid box. I don't know if you have experience, but somebody once said that if you don't tick the box, that the government will actually take from the charity as opposed to give it to it. I wonder, does any have any experience?
Is that gift aid?
Yeah, the gift aid. If
Yeah.
you don't tick it, what happens?
And you don't get the gift aid?
No.
The charity, the government keeps it?
They're deducting from the charity?
No. I think what, if you give me £100 and you've
Right.
gift aided and you pay tax, the
Right.
government will automatically give us the tax on that, on, well, I don't know what is it, what's it, 23% or something?
Yeah, it's exempted, isn't it?
That's
the
right,
tax?
so it comes to, so we get in fact £123.
You do?
Yeah,
Okay.
so if you didn't tick the box, we would just get the £100.
Okay, thank you.
But question on that same thing, because I'm retired now, so I don't pay a lot of tax.
But you still pay tax.
I still pay a little
Yeah.
bit, but the amount of charity I do have to work it out. Because if I tick that box every time, and I've gone over my limit, I will have to pay that difference.
Really?
Yes. I will have to pay that.
I would have thought they would just cut off paying the tax.
I read somewhere that if you give too much gift aid, if you haven't got the tax to back it up,
Right.
you would end up paying that gift aid tax that you gave.
I would have thought, but I'm not an expert, I would have thought
Okay, but
that
what
that's
about-
if you wanted the charity. Some people, when they give a donation, like £100, they say, well, I want to give you £123 because I know the government's going to give you 23. So I would have thought in your circumstances that when you've reached the limit that your tax will allow,
Yeah.
because you're on a lower tax rate now,
Yeah.
then they would just not forward the
That's
money.
what I thought until I read this.
But I don't think they would be expecting you to make up the difference.
Yes, if I've given you the gift aid and I don't have
No.
the tax, I'm going to have to pay for it.
I would have to check on
I
that,
will
but
check
I
on
would
it, yeah.
think that's very unlikely. I think you might have misunderstood something. but
I will double
I
check
can't
that.
swear. Because there's no reason for them to say, you owe us
Yes.
£23 off the £100. Why?
Yes.
Why? Because the government is only giving us something that you have given to them.
Yes.
And if you haven't given it to them, they can't give it to us, essentially.
Okay, anybody else? Let's have the lady at the back there.
You mentioned the food pantry. I just wanted to know how the food pantry.
Oh, yes, yes.
I wanted to know how do people find out about it, and how do you vet people that come there? What are these sort of?
They have an interview, so I'm not quite sure of all the details. I've got a lady that looks after that, but we vet them. I think they have to show somehow that they are in need of this. Because, you know, if they turn up in a BMW, then there's, you know, that would be nonsensical. So they have an interview. They pay a membership, so there's a 6-month membership. So that membership will depend on how many is in the family. So if they've got 5 in the family, they will pay a membership for that 6 months. It's a one-off payment that helps us with our administration costs. So let's say, for the sake of argument, it's £8 for that 6 months. That then gives them the opportunity to come every week, and every week they can buy, like I said, the cheaper produce, the fresh produce, because it's a food bank, it's difficult to get fresh produce. So they get the fresh produce at a lower rate than they can get in most shops. And then they might pay £5, £6 for that, whatever they've decided to spend. And then all the other donated food, they get given to them. So we will go to different supermarkets that will allow us to have certain produce. We'll go to the fruit market, we will get a certain produce. So we can give that out. And then after 6 months, we have a review. And we say to them, right, you've been coming for 6 months, how are your circumstances? Are they still the same, or have they got better, or have they got worse? And if they've got worse, then we can give them certain social advice on what sort of benefits they could get now because their circumstances have changed. If they've got better, then they go into a slightly different category where they are now still able to receive the free food, and they have to pay a slightly higher membership fee to go on for the next 6 months. So, and then some people will drop out because they, not because they can't, because if they can't afford it, then it's a different agreement. If it's because they, you know, the husband's now got a job, or the wife is now working part-time, and there's not the same need, then they finish with us, because it's no longer necessary. We're not giving away food to people who can afford it, we're giving it to people who can't afford it.
So you're constantly monitoring?
Yes, it gets monitored on a 6 monthly basis.
Most food banks, I mean the one where I am at, where we mentioned earlier about Feed the Needy.
That's right, you did.
Organisation, and that operates in Romford, so that one is actually vetted, so all the people who come, their social security number is checked, the council has a record of their status. Are they on council houses, are they on a waiting list, are they homeless, and those numbers are used then to check on them every single week.
So how do parents or people find out about you, about this?
The way we've run this one is initially we just advertised it according to certain postcodes, because we didn't want to be flooded, because we knew we couldn't cope with a flood. Then we found that we weren't getting enough, so it was word of mouth, and now it is at word of mouth. So as people go around, and we do put notices on the internet, we do put notices in doctors' surgeries, we do speak with the council and let them know that this is available so they can signpost people to us.
Okay, let's go with Norman next.
Okay. Charities
Sorry,
like
who is the question for?
everyone.
Okay.
Charities like yourself basically attract a lot of companies in terms of they might be doing it free, offering you their services for free, or they might want you to, I don't know, give you free food, say, just for yourself, basically. Is that a promotional interest, or is that basically, how can I, to make your charity look good, you know, like, especially in the local area in Romford or something? Is that what they're doing, or?
Can I answer that?
Yes, of
Seems to
course.
be,
Yeah, because he's looking at you. That's why I was asking who's the question for.
First and foremost, we don't just take money off anybody. We have to be careful. So in that respect, if it's come from, we're not allowed to accept money from the lottery. There's a lot of lottery funding around. We cannot apply for it because lottery is a form of gambling, and the Salvation Army stands against gambling. So in that respect, if we apply, I applied to municipal authorities once for a fund. It was a fund that had multiple sources of income, and I didn't know that one of those sources was the lottery fund. Though nobody could actually identify that the £10,000 that was given to my cause was actually from the lottery, but because the lottery was part of that fund, I had to give that money back, so we're careful on that. We don't accept, you said, food for myself. We never accept anything. We're not allowed to accept anything for ourselves. So if anybody wants to give me something, I say, then it's got to go to the army. So anything, so there's no benefit to myself or my colleagues. We can't accept. If somebody wants to give me a box of chocolates, that's okay at the end of the year, you know. But generally speaking, we can't accept gifts. I can't remember the rest of your question.
Where I do volunteering, okay, with Sue Riders in Dagenham, the manager basically, somebody, I don't know, some company came in and I don't know, she got a concession basically. She bought something for her son, okay, but I feel basically because she's a figure basically liked by everyone in Dagenham, Heathway. Yeah. So she's getting
I would say we wouldn't accept that. We can't, because you're using your position for advantage. Though she might not have done it on purpose. Somebody was, grateful for the work that she did, but we couldn't accept it. But you talked about volunteers, companies offering volunteers. We do a lot of that, where companies at Christmas, the Christmas parcels. We don't have enough volunteers to pack all those parcels. In fact, there's a couple of solicitors in town, and I think an estate agent. They send over a team of people to help wrap all the presents and pack them into bags and things like that. We have some companies want to do a social project, and they might want to paint a children's home, or they might want to make a park for the children to play in, or something like that. So companies, it's good practice, but again, it's not about ourselves. It's for the people that we're serving.
Okay, Linda.
I was going to ask, do either of your faiths provide any employment opportunities for people when they are receiving charitable means, or training facilities for them to gain skills in the workforce at all?
Okay, so are you talking about the charity organisations themselves?
Faith, just the faith, yeah, your faiths in general.
They do, yes. So, a mosque will need a cleaner, a caretaker, an imam, a secretary for the office, things like that. Within charity organisations, there's always a chair and a secretary and a treasurer who is then paid to do all the work, publicity, things like that. There are definitely jobs there.
Within the Salvation Army, we will employ a lot of people in a lot of projects. So we have a central regional person who knows all the jobs that are available and will put those out. It's more difficult these days, and I'm not sure if what your question was, is that when you're working with a vulnerable person, there are only certain things that you can do with a vulnerable person so that you're not exploiting them. And it used to be, in the old days, that if you were a homeless person, you came to a Salvation Army hostel, and through our guidance, etc., etc., they were starting to get their lives together, you could then promote them to be like an assistant carer within the hostel, because they knew what it was like to be homeless, they knew what it was like to be an alcoholic, and though they had recovered from those addictions, or were recovering, they could sit next to a guy or a woman and know exactly what they were feeling. I couldn't, because, okay, I can be trained, but I don't know what it's like because I've not been dependent and I've not been homeless. That's very difficult to do these days, and some of my colleagues, similar age to me, have actually been homeless alcoholics, been re-socialised and perhaps converted and become members of the Salvation Army, and eventually became pastors and ran the hostels. That's very difficult to do these days because there's so many restrictions upon how people in a vulnerable situation can be used, because it can be tarred as, can be labelled as exploitation. Whereas we would say, no, this is somebody doing something to help himself. So if he's got to, if part of his accommodation, part of the rules is he's got to keep part of the common area clean, and is involved in peeling the potatoes or involved in washing the floor, that's for the common good. We see that as being something that is healthy. Yes, he is supported by paid staff, he's not on his own in that respect, but it's very difficult to do that these days. So people who are vulnerable, we can give them volunteer roles, but we can't give them roles that somebody would normally be paid for. It has to be a role that is only for a volunteer. Because if they could be paid for, if they were taking on a role that somebody would normally be paid for, then why can't they have the job? Well, they probably can't have the job because they've got certain issues that you wouldn't want to employ that person, because you then got legalities to take into consideration, whereas a volunteer, it's a little bit more relaxed.
We've got Rutland Gate behind the National Centre. We have people there who are paid. I mean, I go and volunteer for the finance office once a week, but the 3 people there are paid, so they're employed. I've still got to answer the previous one, but just to emphasise about influences from outside. You have to be a Baha'i to give to the Baha'i faith. And when they were building the Baha'i House of Worship in Wilmette, Illinois, just outside Chicago, it said that one of the Rockefellers came by and thought, hey, what a neat building, and offered $30,000 towards it. And it was the only time in his life he'd been given his money back, saying, I'm sorry, we're not a Baha'i, we can't accept it.
Okay, Aisha?
Yeah, just wanted to add to what you were saying there, and also you were saying earlier about big charities taking as much as 80% towards administration and just 20% towards the charity. Is it not so that charities and non-profit organisations that have to publish their statement of financial position and profit loss every year?
Yeah.
So you can analyse these things to see where the money goes. But also I want to be to where people of the other extreme of where it's saying 100% donations go to charity. Because I've worked in finance myself in the accountancy office, and sometimes you're dealing with an organisation where they're totally based on volunteers within their finance office. It's an absolute shambles. So I'm not against some portion of it going towards administration for a better run organisation, and so the money is better spent.
Yeah, like I said, it's recognised that admin costs are necessary, and therefore there is a percentage that is acceptable. I don't know what the law is in the UK. I've not been involved in that side since I've been back. But I know when I was abroad there was a percentage limitation that you were allowed to take. For example, if you were a church or an organisation when Britain was part of the EU, you could receive EU funding for a social project, you know, or a charitable action, and you were allowed to take 25% to cover other costs. You didn't have to list what your staff costs, you didn't have to list what your administration costs. They just said 25% of a particular percentage of the grant that was given. So if you received 100,000 from the EU, of which 50,000 was used for what they call direct costs, and 50,000 was used for indirect costs. Direct costs were like paying for the salaries. Indirect costs would be heat and light and tables and chairs for the particular service you're providing. Then you could charge 25% of the indirect costs for your administration, regardless of how much you are actually paying for your administration. So you could end up with a small profit, but most organisations would use that profit to give sustainability to the project they've just opened. So it all got used in the end for the right purposes.
Okay, coming up to the last few questions now, so
I'm assuming all of you are involved in charitable financing. So have any of you had to, from the local council and the central government, had to apply for a course that you're financing? And does that mean all of you had to fill in tons and tons and paperwork, where it went to the local council, the central government, or anything like that?
Okay, so when you form a charity, you have to apply for a charity number. So that would be your liaison really with the government and things. And for that you have to show bank account statements, you have to publish your accounts every year, and you need to have a treasurer in place and a secretary and a chairperson, that kind of stuff. So that would be at a local level. With the really, really large organisations, obviously they have a lot more input, but then your accounts are published on the internet every year.
And it also depends on what type of funding you're applying for. If you're applying for, like, let's say, a small grant for doing an arts project, yeah, you will have to fill in an application form, and they may ask for some evidence of what your last year's budget was,
Yes.
for example. If you're applying for a larger amount of money because you want to employ staff and you're wanting to pay rent on a building, then they will ask for more evidence. So yes, there are forms to fill out, and there's usually quite a few forms. It's never...
It's
I think,
not easy, is it?
yeah, it's gone are the days. I know when I first started as a Salvation Army officer, I could write to a local philanthropic charitable donor and write a letter saying I want to do a children's club and I need £200 or £300. So it's going back a long time if you only needed £200 or £300. And by that letter, that was all they needed. Today, if you write to philanthropic organisations and funders, it's a lot more tighter. There's a lot more evidence required from you.
Can I ask you something about that? You're competing against other people with different causes, I don't know, from different councils or different faiths or whatever. Anyway, okay. What is the gimmick that you have to use? What do you have to use to stand out in front of everybody else against others? That you have to.
Gimmick isn't the right word, but there are certain things that certain funders will like to see. So you need to know the priorities of your funder. So if your funder is very much into education or women's rights or something of that nature, and that's what the type of program you're doing, so your program will be aimed at your funder. But there are other times where you are wanting to ensure that you're not in competition, and some of the, again, it's slightly different. If you're going for European Union funding or big funding from other national pots of money, is that they want to see unity. They want to see a spectrum of organisations working together. They don't want to see everybody like-minded. They want to see a mixture of different types of organisations that wouldn't normally work together, working together. So it might be, let's say you wanted to do something for underprivileged children. They would want to see that, the Salvation Army working alongside the Muslims, working alongside the police, working alongside the schools. They'd like to see that mixture, that partnership of people, because that means that you're getting not just one person's view or one organisation's view, you're getting skills and understanding from a wider section of society to help meet that particular need, because no need is so simple. Most needs are complex, and they need complex partnerships to get those type of funds.
And we, of course, can't accept funding from anyone because only the Baha'is can give to the Baha'is.
Fasila.
I've got a question for Mike. Can you still apply to the European Commission for funding? Because it used to be easy when we were part of it.
No, not now. There are other European funds that are available. There's the European EEC, what's that? European Economic Community, which is wider than the EU. You can apply to them. And there are other international funds that are European-based, like the Marshall Fund, which is the American fund that helped rebuild Germany and parts of Europe after the war. They still do stuff. There's Greek, what's the Greek oil tycoon called? Stavros? I can't remember his name. But there are other European philanthropic funds you can apply to, but not the EU.
And just one more question to Mike. Do you have to go through a process to volunteer for your charity?
That we interview everybody who wants to be a volunteer.
Okay.
So we have to do that. That's so that there's child protection in there. You know that you've got the right police protections, that you don't have a police record. I mean, it doesn't matter if you've been to prison, but as long as it's not been to prison, that is related to something that you're going to be doing. You know, so.
Perhaps I can also mention that as a charity, we are, the Baha'i Faith is actually incorporated in Company's House, so we have to give a return to Company's House every year with the accounts and everything. And also do have to give it a return to the Charities Commission. So that's 2 returns we have to do.
Yeah, we all have to.
Yeah.
Okay, last question from Pooja.
It's interesting how much I learned today about the Salvation Army in particular, because my son did ask me a question about what's the Salvation Army. As you said, not many people know. And do you excuse my ignorance? I was part of it for something to do with the army.
No, we're not military. We don't carry guns. No.
That's what I thought.
No.
So I never knew that it was a charity organisation.
It was set up as a reaction against middle-class white churches in Queen Victoria's time. And of course that was during the time of the British Empire and things like that. And so it was during the period where being part of an army, of a God's army marching through the world, righting wrongs and fighting for justice, fighting against sin. It was a romantic image, you know, so to be an army of God. Today it's a little bit old-fashioned to be talking in those terms, but essentially it's the same. But it's an army of God, you know, an army of people going out trying to reverse and fight for justice.
I shall very quickly, last question.
I forgot.
You forgot?
Can I say also that the Methodists also were a breakaway from the Church of England.
Yes.
The Church of England was too middle class.
Yes, that's true.
So Wesley broke away as well. And the Methodists, as late as 1900, it was called the Methodist sect.
Yeah, yes, I think we all got tarred with the word sect at
yes,
some stage or another.
Okay, our next Interfaith Forum is on the founder of our faith. It's on Wednesday, 28th June at 7 o'clock. And an email will go around with details of the venue. We're not sure yet on the venue. Okay, so thank you very much everybody for coming.
Thank you.
And see you all again soon.
Thank you.